Before you immerse yourself in tonight's terror, hit that subscribe button if you think you can handle even darker stories lurking in the shadows. I wasn't always a bartender. Hell, I didn't even want to be one. But here I am, working nights at a place that feels like it's straight out of a nightmare, the Devil's Cup. I guess you could say I had my reasons for ending up here. I'm not proud of them, but I'll explain. Years ago, I made a choice I'll never forget. A reckless, stupid decision during a night that should have been like any other. I didn't think it through, and because of that, several lives were lost. The guilt? It's been eating at me every damn day since. I tried to move on, to do things right, but nothing stuck. That's when I heard about the Devil's Cup, a place that devours debts. The rumors were strange, sure, but desperate times call for desperate measures, right? What did I have to lose? I thought maybe, just maybe, I could atone for what I'd done. Maybe this place, this speakeasy hidden away somewhere in the shadows of the city, could offer me a way out, a way to pay off my spiritual debt. I found it eventually. The door was tucked between two brick walls like it was trying to hide from the world. The owner, a man with a knowing smile and eyes that didn't seem to blink, welcomed me in. He didn't ask why I was there. He already knew. Without saying much, he handed me a piece of paper, a list of rules. He didn't have to explain. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. This bar doesn't just serve drinks, it collects debts. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I sure learned soon enough. Here's what I learned. Rule 1, if someone orders the crimson deal, prick your finger and let a single drop of blood fall into the shaker. Do not hesitate. Rule 2, when the clock strikes 2 a.m., cover every bottle with a cloth. Do not let the bottles see the mirrors. Rule 3, if a customer leaves without drinking, pour the drink into the sink immediately and look away until the liquid disappears. Rule 4, never drink anything served here, even water. Rule 5, before locking up, check the ledger. If there's a new name, leave it open. If there isn't, you may go. The bar was quiet, the usual hum of conversation replaced by the soft clink of glasses. I was wiping down the counter when I saw him, one of the regulars. A sharp-dressed man, always impeccably put together. His suit was dark, almost black, and his tie, a deep crimson, seemed to catch the light in a way that made it look almost sinister. He'd been in a few times before, always quiet, always alone, but tonight there was something different about him. He slid into the stool at the far end, his eyes locking with mine almost immediately. There was something sharp about his gaze, like he could see straight through me. He didn't even have to say anything. I already knew what he was ordering. "The crimson deal," he said, his voice smooth like velvet, but carrying an edge that made my stomach churn. I froze. My hand, still holding the rag, trembled slightly. I'd heard the rumors about that drink, the one people whispered about when they thought no one was listening. The one that wasn't just a drink, but a promise, a deal, a debt. I glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight. I didn't have long. I knew the rule, and I knew what was expected of me. But even then, I hesitated. The weight of it all pressed down on me. The drop of blood, the debt. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face whatever came next, but there was no turning back now. The man leaned forward, his smile widening as he saw my hesitation. His eyes darkened. "Hesitation isn't part of the deal, bartender. Do it." His voice dropped, low and threatening, like a growl just beneath the surface. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't back out now. I pulled my hand away from the rag, my finger already trembling as I pricked it. The sharp sting of the needle was nothing compared to the wave of dread that washed over me. I let the drop of blood fall into the shaker, watching as it hit the liquid. The blood mixed with the drink, and the entire concoction sizzled, glowing faintly red. It was unnatural, like nothing I had ever seen before. I forced myself to swallow the lump in my throat and poured the drink into the glass. The man's grin widened even more as he picked it up. "Cheers," he said, and took a long, deliberate sip. His eyes never left mine. I watched, unable to look away, as he savored the drink. His wicked grin remained, though there was something different now, something darker in his eyes. I thought it might just be my imagination, but the way his gaze bore into me made me feel like I was already in too deep. He set the glass down with a quiet clink and leaned in close, his breath cold against my ear. "You've just signed your debt," he whispered, his voice like ice against my skin. "You'll regret that drop, bartender." I didn't respond. What could I say? I felt the weight of his words more than I wanted to. But before I could even process what had just happened, he stood up and walked out, his footsteps echoing through the empty bar. I stood there, frozen, my hands still gripping the counter. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. But there was this coldness that crept over me, like the air had shifted, suddenly heavier. I glanced up at the mirror behind the bar, trying to shake off the unease that was settling in my chest. And that's when I saw it. His reflection was still there. The man had already left, but his image lingered in the mirror, eyes hollow, his grin twisted into something grotesque. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It felt like something wrong. His expression was inhuman, like a mask stretched too thin over something far darker. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it didn't go away. The reflection didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with that soulless grin, as if it had all the time in the world. I don't know how long I stood there, just frozen, staring into the mirror. It felt like forever. But eventually the reflection faded, the man's image dissipating like smoke. I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. That's when I noticed the clock. It was past 1:30 now, and the bar was still eerily quiet. I tried to shake it off, to brush it aside, but deep down I couldn't deny it. Something had changed. The night dragged on, and the bar had started to empty out. The usual late-night crowd had already filtered out, leaving the place eerily quiet. I was wiping down the counter when the door creaked open again. She stumbled in, barely able to keep herself upright. A young woman, no older than her early 20s, with pale skin and wide, frantic eyes. She looked like she'd seen something that had completely shattered her. She approached the bar slowly, as though every step took immense effort. There was a tremor in her voice as she ordered, her words barely above a whisper. "I'll have a gin," she said, her words shaking. I nodded, but something about her seemed off. She didn't look like someone who came into bars often. Her hands trembled as they gripped the edge of the counter. I poured her the drink, trying to make small talk, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes darted around the room like she was seeing something I couldn't. "I made a mistake," she whispered, barely audible. "They're coming for me." I leaned in, hoping to comfort her, but before I could say anything, I felt it. The chandelier above us flickered. I froze, a chill running up my spine. The air felt different, heavier, and I could see her eyes widen in pure terror. She didn't even look at me anymore. She was staring into the shadows, her face drained of color, her breath catching in her throat. The lights flickered again, but this time, it wasn't just the chandelier. It was like the whole room stuttered, as if reality itself was glitching. I could see the shadows on the walls twist, stretch, and gather in the corners of the room. Something was moving within them, something I couldn't quite make out. The woman stood up, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her eyes were fixed on the growing darkness, her mouth opening as if to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows rushed toward her, faster than I could process. They swarmed around her, forming dark, inhuman shapes that seemed to breathe and pulse with a life of their own. Then one of them leaned in, its form indistinct, just a blur of darkness. It whispered something in her ear, too quiet for me to hear. Her face contorted in fear, and the next thing I knew, she let out a scream. It was the kind of scream that made my blood run cold. It wasn't human. Nothing about it was. The shadows dragged her into the dark corner of the room, pulling her away into a place that shouldn't have existed. The air grew thick with the sound of her desperate cries, but they quickly faded, swallowed by the darkness. Then silence. I stood there, frozen in place, watching where she had been moments ago. The bar was still, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator in the back. Her drink sat untouched on the counter, a glass of gin that had barely been stirred. I knew what I had to do. The rules were clear. Rule 3. I grabbed the glass and, without looking at it, poured the liquid into the sink. But as soon as the drink hit the basin, something went wrong. The gin didn't fall into the drain. It froze in midair, suspended for a moment, and then dissolved into black ash, as though it had been burned away. A faint, charred handprint appeared in the sink, the burnt outline of fingers etched into the porcelain. The smell of smoke lingered in the air, thick and acrid, as if something had been consumed and left behind. I backed away, staring at the sink, the handprint still lingering there in the water's reflection. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest. This was no ordinary bar. This was no ordinary place. Whatever had just happened to her wasn't something I could explain. And as I stood there trying to process what I'd witnessed, I couldn't help but think, was I next? It was around 1 a.m. when I first heard the knocking. At first it was faint, so faint I thought it was just the sound of the building settling, or maybe the wind pushing against the walls. But then it came again, louder this time, steady and rhythmic, like someone was tapping on the other side of the locked storage room door. I froze. The storage room had been locked since I started. No one went in there, no one ever needed to. But the knocking continued, insistent. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't heard anything, and just get through the night. But the curiosity tugged at me. I had already broken so many rules. What was one more? I walked over to the door, my hand hovering over the handle. My mind raced, and I found myself asking, just for a second, if I really wanted to know what was waiting on the other side. But it was too late. Before I could stop myself, my hand turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was empty, just as it always was. But then I saw it. A bloody handprint smeared across the inside of the door. The blood was fresh, still glistening, though there was no sign of anyone who could have made it. The handprint was large, far too big for mine. It looked wrong. The way it was smeared, like someone had pressed their palm against the door and then dragged it down, leaving a trail of red. I stared at it for a moment, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But the smell of iron filled the air, and I knew it wasn't just my imagination. That's when the chandelier flickered. The light above me stuttered, and for a split second, the whole room seemed to shift. The shadows stretched unnaturally, and I could see shapes moving in the corners of my vision. Figures, people, or at least something that looked like people. I snapped my head toward the door, and before I could react, the figures stepped forward. At first, they were just silhouettes in the dim light, but as they approached, I could make out their features, or rather, the lack of them. Their faces were smooth, featureless, like blank slates, and their movements jerky, like they didn't quite belong in this world. One of them reached out, its hand holding a drink. It was a glass I didn't recognize, not one I'd made. The liquid inside was a deep, angry red, swirling with an unnatural intensity. The figure didn't speak, but its hand pushed the drink toward me with unnerving force, practically shoving it into my palms. The second my fingers wrapped around the glass, the liquid inside began to boil. The heat was unbearable, as if the drink itself had come to life, trying to burn its way out. I dropped it immediately, but the moment it hit the floor, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. I barely had time to react before something even stranger happened. The shards of glass didn't stay scattered. They started to shift, moving on their own, rearranging themselves on the floor like they had a mind of their own. I couldn't look away as the pieces clinked together, forming a message that made my blood run cold. You owe us. The words glowed faintly, like the glass had absorbed some sort of dark energy, and I couldn't escape the feeling that it wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. A promise that I was already in too deep, and there was no turning back. I stood there, staring at the message, my hands trembling. The figures didn't move, but they were still there, waiting, watching. I had no idea what they wanted or what was coming next, but deep down I knew I couldn't outrun the consequences of my actions. This bar wasn't just collecting debts, it was taking them, and I was already marked. A new face walked into the bar that night, young, disheveled, eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place. The man ordered the usual, but then he asked for something different. The morning whisper. I froze. I'd never heard of that drink before. He must have sensed my hesitation because he smirked, leaning across the counter. It's a special one. You wouldn't want to know why it's called that. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to get to work. I grabbed the ingredients and started mixing, but the moment the liquid touched the glass, something changed. At first, it was just a faint sound, a low murmur, barely noticeable. But as I stirred, it grew louder, like whispers carried on the wind. They were soft at first, almost soothing. But then, as I poured the liquid into the glass, they became clearer, turning into sharp, agonizing screams that made my stomach turn. I looked up, eyes wide, my heart hammering in my chest. The patron was staring at the glass, his face pale, his mouth open but no words coming out. "Is something wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could barely hear myself over the screams that seemed to be coming from the drink. He recoiled from the glass, his eyes filled with terror. He didn't touch it. Instead, he pushed the glass back toward me as if it was poison. I can't," he stammered, his hand shaking. I didn't know it would scream. I wasn't sure what to do, but something inside me told me I had to follow the rules. I grabbed the glass and hurried to the sink, pouring the drink down, trying not to look at the mess of liquid swirling down the drain. But just as I thought it was gone, the liquid started to crawl back up. It rose out of the sink like it had a life of its own, twisting and turning, pooling back onto the counter. And there it was, plain as day. "Help me." The words formed slowly, as if the liquid itself was writing them, but the screams didn't stop. They echoed in my mind, louder now, relentless, like they were burning into my thoughts. I rubbed my temples, trying to block it out, but the sound stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. No matter what I did, I couldn't escape the cries. They followed me around the bar, ringing in my ears, getting louder with every passing minute. I looked back at the patron, but he had already gone, vanishing into the dark. I didn't even notice when he left. All that was left was the glass, now empty, and the echo of those screams that wouldn't stop. It was 2 a.m., and my hands were shaking as I rushed to cover the bottles. The clock seemed to mock me, ticking louder with each passing second. Rule 2, I reminded myself, cover the bottles before the clock strikes. I had to follow the rules, even if every part of me screamed to just run. I was almost done, just one more bottle to go. My eyes darted to the mirror behind the bar, catching the flicker of something moving in the reflection. It wasn't right. The bottle I'd missed, just sitting there, untouched, reflected back at me, but something was wrong with it. The image in the mirror stretched unnaturally, its shape distorting, twisting into something grotesque. The reflection of the bottle opened up, forming a wide, gaping mouth with jagged, serrated teeth that didn't belong on a bottle. A low, guttural whisper started to rise from the mouth, a voice that was both mine and not mine. It started soft, almost like a distant murmur, but as I stared, paralyzed, it grew louder. The whisper became a chant, reverberating through my skull, over and over again. "Bartender! Bartender! Bartender!" I slammed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the sound only grew louder, more insistent, until it was a deafening roar in my head. My heart was racing, my breath shallow as panic set in. I had to look away, I had to. But when I turned my head, my reflection didn't follow. It stayed in the mirror, staring back at me, smiling. The grin on my reflection's face was wicked, twisted. It leaned forward, its eyes gleaming with something dark and knowing. "You're part of this now," it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. I froze, sweat pouring down my face. My reflection's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I thought I saw something else behind them. Something that wasn't human. It was too late to look away now. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free from its gaze. The reflection started to laugh, a low, mocking sound that echoed in the empty bar. The laugh didn't stop. It just kept going, growing louder, until it was all I could hear. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew. I had crossed a line. There was no turning back anymore. Whatever game I was a part of, I was in it for good. I wasn't just serving drinks anymore. I wasn't just following rules. I was part of the darkness that ran this place, and it was part of me now. The chandelier flickers again, and I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The atmosphere shifts, heavier now, as if something's changed. When I look around, I notice them. Not just the usual shadows, but people. Real people, or at least they used to be. The figure that steps forward is all too familiar. Tom. He was the bartender before me. I remember hearing rumors about his disappearance, about how no one knew where he went. And now, here he is, standing in front of me, translucent, but unmistakable. He doesn't say anything at first. He just looks at me, his expression twisted by something. Guilt, regret, fear. Then finally he speaks, and his voice cracks. You have to break the rule. It's the only way to stop it. I don't understand. What rule? I've followed them all, every single one. But as he hands me the photo, something shifts in my gut. It's a picture of the bar, but there's something off about it. A shadowy figure in the background, just out of focus, but its presence is undeniable. Tom's voice wavers again. I couldn't stop it, but you can. Don't let them take you like they took me. I look at him, my mind racing. I should be scared. I am scared. But I can't shake this feeling that maybe breaking the rule is the only way out. I look around. Everything feels wrong now. The people, the patrons, the whole damn place. It's all wrong. I step forward. I shouldn't have. I know that now, but I broke the rule. The change is immediate. The walls seem to bend. The air thickens, like the whole place is folding in on itself. The patrons' faces contort, their bodies jerking unnaturally. This isn't the same bar. This isn't the same world. It's something else entirely. Something worse. I turn to Tom, but he's not the same. His face is frozen in an expression of horror, his mouth opening as if to shout, but no sound comes out. I realize too late, I've sealed my fate. The curse, whatever it is, isn't something you can stop. It's like a chain that pulls you down tighter and tighter until you can't breathe, until you are the thing you fear. And just like that, the bar doesn't feel like a bar anymore. It feels like a tomb. The sound of the chandelier crashing to the ground echoes through the bar. Glass shatters, but it's not the noise that makes my blood run cold. It's the way everything seems to freeze for a moment. The patrons, these ghostly figures, stop moving. Their empty eyes are locked on me, faces that I once knew, faces twisted by time and regret. And then, as if the air itself thickens, it hits me. I'm not just in the bar. I am the bar. All of this, the rules, the drinks, the patrons are pieces of me, reflections of choices I made long ago. I'm not just serving drinks. I'm serving my own guilt, my own debts. Before I can fully process this, the owner appears, his molten gold eyes burning into me. He doesn't speak, but I feel every word as it pierces my thoughts. This place is not real, he says without opening his mouth. None of it is. It's a mirror to your soul. My stomach drops. It's not a bar. It's not a speakeasy. It's a manifestation of everything I've done wrong. Every drink served, every rule followed was a test, a consequence, each one connected to a mistake I made years ago. The lives I ruined, the people I failed, the chandelier flickering, the patrons who died, the debts that never felt paid. It was all leading to this, to me. The bar is a trap, a reflection of my own sins. And now, breaking the rules, it wasn't just an act of defiance. It was the final step in a cycle I didn't even realize I was trapped in. The extra patrons were never patrons at all. They were people I had wronged, souls I couldn't forgive. I try to move to escape, but it's pointless. The walls close in, and for the first time since I set foot here, I understand what's happening. The Devil's Cup isn't just a drink, it's the price of my soul. The rules, a way to keep me bound to this place. The debts, they're all mine. The owner's voice cuts through the silence. You've paid your debt, bartender, but not in the way you think. The realization hits like a slap. I broke the rule. And now I'm not just a patron, not just a bartender. I'm the new owner, a puppet of my own guilt, doomed to enforce the rules, to trap new souls, to collect new debts. I look at the bar, the same place I once thought I could escape to, and I realize there is no escape anymore. I am this place, and I always will be. I glance around, seeing the same faces, the same souls, the same mistakes. They're all here, and now I'm one of them. The bell above the door jingles as the new bartender steps in, his eyes wide with uncertainty. He's young, eager, full of life, just like I once was. He doesn't know what he's walking into. He doesn't know that he's already marked. I stand behind the bar, my reflection in the mirror catching my attention. The golden eyes stare back at me, just like the owners once did. The weight of everything settles in my chest, but I don't show it. Not to him. I hand him the rules, the same rules that I once thought could be a way out, the same rules that kept me chained. This bar doesn't just serve drinks, I say, my voice cold and detached, but there's something darker behind it now. It collects debts. He takes the paper, his hand shaking slightly, clearly unsure of what to make of it. His eyes flicker between me and the door, like he's thinking of turning around and walking away. But something holds him there. Something invisible, like the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on him. He hesitates. The air grows heavy, and the first of the patrons walk in. I see their hollow eyes, the same as mine now, and I know what's coming. I lean in slightly, my voice barely above a whisper as I watch him, his future self unfolding right before my eyes. Good luck, I tell him, though I know it's not luck that awaits him. It's something much darker. He looks up at me, but I see the doubt in his eyes. He doesn't understand yet, and as the door swings closed behind him, the bar settles into its familiar silence. The chandelier flickers one last time. The devil's cup is hungry again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.